Good evening. It is good to see each of you here this morning. I encourage you to take your Bibles and open them to the book of Nehemiah, chapters 6 and 7. We are going to be studying from there this evening. I was talking to David before services began, and I am just constantly amazed at how timeless the Bible truly is. You know, here we have a book that was penned about a man who lived some 2,500 years ago or so, something like that. He lived 400 some years before Christ walked the earth. And yet the lessons that he gives in this book are still very much applicable to us today. We can take exactly what Nehemiah teaches, exactly what he demonstrates, use it in our own life, and be just as successful as he was. Nothing has changed. The implements of the enemy are still the same. The way in which he tries to ensnare us is the same. And so let's use the same tools against him that others have, and have been victorious in doing so. I'm going to make applications tonight in general, but what I want each of us to do is take those application lessons and how can you use them in your life. I'm not going to tell you what to do with them. That's for you to determine. But I want each of us here to know that there are applications that can be made, and they may differ from one person to another, and that's okay. But you use them in your life as you need to. In Nehemiah chapter 6, what we see is we have the completion of the wall is drawing closer. And as it does, the opposition becomes more desperate. Nehemiah has a punch list, if you will. And those that have been in construction or around construction know what a punch list is. It's when the main task is complete, there's just little loose ends that need to be tied up. And so what Nehemiah tells us is the wall has now been closed in verse 1. There are no breaks, there are no breaches, no openings within the wall that aren't supposed to be there. The only thing left really is to hang the gates. Those still need to be finished. But the wall has been joined together. And it's at this point that we see those three amigos once again. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. They have been the antagonists throughout this entire process. The thorns in the side of Nehemiah, if you will, and now they are really going to kick their antagonism into high gear. Because they see that Israel has almost accomplished what they started to do. And it's very important for us to note that their tactics are the exact same now as they were back at the beginning. They've just been repackaged a little bit, presented in a little different way, but nothing has changed about what they are trying to do to disrupt Nehemiah and Israel. Look in verse 2. They sent message to Nehemiah saying, "Come, let us meet together among the villages in the plain of Ono." But they sought to do me harm. What they're saying, they're sending a message to Nehemiah saying, hey, let's get together and let's talk about this, right? Let's meet and talk about what you're doing, what you're wanting to accomplish. That wasn't their motive. They wanted to kill him. They wanted to get rid of him. They weren't just wanting to have a powwow. They had ulterior motives. But they thought, let's pretend to be all cheery, right? And full of goodwill, and just invite him to have a meeting. Look in verses 5 through 7. It says, Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before, the fifth time, with an open letter in his hand. It was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall, that you may be their king. And you have also appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah. Now these matters will be reported to the king. So come therefore and let us consult together. In essence, what Sanballat is telling Nehemiah is, we're going to tell on you. We've got this letter just full of evidence that is going to condemn you, and if you don't stop, we're going to send it to the king. What they were hoping to do is scaring Nehemiah into stopping. That maybe just the threat of the king becoming aware of these intentions would be enough to make Nehemiah stop. Such short memories. Nehemiah had the blessing of the king to be doing what he was doing. The king had paid for the reconstruction. And so now they're making up things to take back to the king. None of what he said was true. That didn't work, so we drop down to verse 10 of chapter 6. Nehemiah speaking says, afterward I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mechabdabel, who was a secret informer. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple. For they are coming to kill you. Indeed, at night they will come to kill you. And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For this reason he was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way and sin, so that they might have cause for an evil report, that they might reproach me. They came to Nehemiah and they said, your life is in danger. They're going to attack you. I know where you can hide. I will protect you. Let's go into the temple and hide in there. Well, Nehemiah knew you do not go into God's house in that way. Going into the temple will cause Nehemiah's name to be slandered. He would no longer have the reputation that he does among the Israelites, even before God. Nehemiah responds to each of these in the same way that he always has. And the reason for this is he passes everything through a filter. There is a filter that every bit of information gets ran through to process, and that filter is his devotion and his service to God. That came before all else. If it didn't match up with him serving God, he got rid of it. If he ran it through the filter and it became entrapped, he tosses it out without so much as blinking because it did not matter. He was all about service, faithful service to God. And is that not what we should be about as well? Should we not have the same filter that Nehemiah had? That everything we encounter, everything that is thrust upon us, should be ran through this filter first. How is this going to affect my service to God? How is this going to affect me living faithfully to God? And if it's going to adversely affect it, chuck it out. Get rid of it. Because we don't need anything that's going to disrupt that. That is what Nehemiah did. I want us to look first at his response. He was not going to compromise. The first plea that came when they said, come meet with us down here in the plains of Ono. Kind of a worthy name, isn't it? Oh no. If Nehemiah had gone. But they said, come meet us down here in the plains and let's have a talk. He was not going to compromise. What does he say in verse 3? He says, so I sent messengers to them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? He said, I'm too busy to mess with this. I'm busy serving God. I'm busy making sure God's people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't have time to leave and come down to you to meet. But notice he also didn't offer any counter suggestions. He didn't say, well, how about we meet halfway? You know, I can't make it all the way down to the plains of Ono, but maybe I can make it halfway. Are you willing to come meet me there? And he didn't say, why don't you come to me? Why don't I retain home turf, home field advantage, and you bring your complaints up here to me? The request of Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem required Nehemiah to stop working. And it left a very fragile group of people with no real leadership had he submitted to their request. Israel was in a very precarious situation right now. They were just starting to rebuild, starting to be the people that they were called to be. They did not yet have a leadership system in place. It was basically Nehemiah. He was the driving force behind this. And he says, if I walk away now, even just for a little bit, it's going to fall to pieces. I'm going to leave behind the people that need me. There's a lot of compromise in the religious world today for the sake of keeping the peace. We don't want to upset anybody. We don't want to step on toes, so we are going to be willing to compromise here and there. We'll bend the rules a little bit to keep people happy. There's always the charge against the church that it has to adapt to society. Right? Society is changing. And the church needs to change in order to make society feel good about itself. We've got it backwards. The church is not here to make society feel good about its sinful state. The church is here to be an example for society, to have them change their ways, to have them become that which God has called them to be, not make them comfortable in their errors. Nehemiah was more concerned with being faithful than he was about keeping the peace or about compromising. That should be our concern as well. Our concern should be, is God pleased with what I'm doing? Is the way I'm living and conducting myself bringing glory to Him? If so, keep on doing it. And don't let anybody talk you out of serving God. But the next thing that Nehemiah did was he called a spade a spade. He just called it like he saw it. Look at verse 5 and through 7. Or excuse me, we read 5 through 7, the letter, the supposed letter that they were going to send the king. And let me ask you this, if it was such a convincing letter, why would you tip your hand? Why would you play that card? If they thought they had a case against Nehemiah with this letter, why would you show it to him first? They didn't have a real case, and they understood that. But nonetheless, they bring this letter to Nehemiah, and they say, looky what we got. We are going to send this away to the king. And Nehemiah answers in this way, then I sent to him, saying, no such things as you say are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. Friends, brethren, I want you to listen to me closely. Contrary to what we learn from society, not every accusation must be accepted as being valid. Just because somebody says it does not mean we have to accept it. That is what we see in society going on right now. I'm offended. You have to validate me. You have to accept that. You have to change because I'm offended. And these three amigos, they had concocted an elaborate story that described Israel's actions in a very negative light. They said they are building a rebellion right under your very nose. And Nehemiah is looking to be their king. That would put him at odds with King Artaxerxes. You can't have two kings. And so now what is Artaxerxes going to do? Should he believe this? Should he be told about this? And so their actions are painted in a very negative way. And I want to illustrate this with a recent example from our own past. It sounds very familiar. How many within the last year and a half heard somebody or a group of people say that churches need to stop meeting? If they continue, it's clear they don't care about anyone. We've heard these accusations. The media has been putting it out quite heavily. Churches need to stop associating, need to stop meeting in person. When they do, it demonstrates they don't care about anyone. And what's our immediate response? Oh, we're quick to go on the defensive. And we're quick to say, no, that's not true. Here's why it's not true. People, that argument will not work, and here is why. Because a false premise cannot be easily refuted, because all parties involved must be satisfied with the truth of the conclusion. They don't care about the truth. That is not their goal. And so when you show them why they're wrong, they don't care because they already know they're wrong. They're just trying to get their way. Those that aren't concerned with the truth to begin with won't be concerned with the truth at the end. They're just not. And so when we sit back and we try to reason with them and we try to justify why we're doing what we're doing, it's falling on deaf ears. What was Nehemiah's reaction? Y'all are making it up and we're going to keep doing what we're doing. That's what he told them. Can we have that backbone in our lives today? Can we take that stance against those that say the church shouldn't be doing what it's doing? You people are endangering others. It's just full of lies. And we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Because we are serving God. He didn't try to refute their claims. He didn't need to. He didn't need to tell them you're wrong and here's why. He just needed to believe within himself, and he needed Israel to believe that we are doing what's right. We are doing that which God expects. He called it exactly as he saw it, and he didn't let it slow him down. He didn't call a timeout and say, okay, Israel, we've got to huddle up on this. We've got some accusations. We're going to slow down a little bit, and we're going to change things around until they leave us alone, and then we're going to ramp back up. You can't do that. How many congregations do you know that still haven't been able to open their doors since all this junk started? There's a lot of them. Once you take your foot off the pedal, it's hard to get it back on again. Momentum that you have is lost. We can't live like that. We can't live letting other people control what it is we do when it comes to serving God. And the last thing we see with Nehemiah, as far as this chapter goes, when he was approached by this false prophet and said, they are coming to kill you. They're going to come at night and they're going to take your life. And the answer is, Nehemiah, that you should go into the temple and you should hide. And Nehemiah's response in verse 11 says, should such a man as I flee? And who is there such as I who would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Even if his life was in danger, Nehemiah would not desecrate the house of God. God was always first. And at the time when Nehemiah said this, he didn't even know that it was all false. His life very well could have been in danger. And he still said, I'm not going in there. It was the place of worship and sacrifice. It was not to be used as his own personal panic room. He stood for God. And then he understood that the plea was falsified. He didn't try to justify. He didn't try to compromise his actions. Israel needs me. They need me to be here to continue to lead them. I'll go into the temple and hide in there until this passes. I'm doing this for the betterment of God's people. Nope. He didn't say that. Who am I to go into the temple? Who am I to run? In all things, brethren, God comes first. Mike made mention of that at the beginning of Bible class this morning. That in all things, no matter what comes down the pike, God comes first. It doesn't matter what entity, what organization is knocking at the door. It doesn't matter what we are hearing from the media sources, from friends, from family. None of that matters. What matters is God. And that we are putting Him first in our lives. When we do that, as Mike said, everything else is going to fall into place. When we put God first, it's all going to be okay. It really is. And so as we move down through the rest of the chapter, what we find is the wall had been built, and now the gates are hung. Jerusalem has now been enclosed again. They had overcome and they had persevered. Look at all the opposition we've examined from beginning with chapter 3, chapter 4. Now look at all the trials that they have overcome to get where they are. But just having the wall rebuilt and having the gates hung, that was not the end goal. And all of chapter 7 demonstrates that. But it wasn't about the physical. Verses 8 of chapter 7, verses 8 through 67 of that chapter list all those who had returned to Jerusalem. And I was really thinking, I didn't get to talk to him in time, but I was going to ask Scott if he would to get up and read all of chapter 7 and just see how white I could get his face to go. We have listed a bunch of names and a bunch of numbers. What is the significance of this? When you go through all of chapter 7 and you look at all the people that had returned, when you get down towards the end, you can actually total up the number of individuals that have come back. 49,942 people had returned to Jerusalem. Were there. If this was about building a wall, if all it was about was the physical structure of around Jerusalem, this many people wouldn't have been necessary. You just need a good labor force to take care of it. Not close to 50,000 people. And it's because it's not about the physical. While they had been reconstructing the wall, they were also reconstructing themselves. Israel as God's people had been broken down just as the walls surrounding Jerusalem had been broken down. And they had been scattered throughout various empires. They were no longer a collective unit. Now they have pulled together. They had all assembled in their home. In the very last verse of chapter 7, verse 73, the second part of it, it says, when the 7th month came, the children of Israel were in their cities. God's people had come home. In just a short amount of time, the wall was completed in 52 days. From the time Nehemiah began working on the wall to the time the last gate was hung, 52 days to rebuild, to fortify the city of Jerusalem. Chapter 8 begins the homecoming. Because we are going to see a change in the people that was not there before, that had not been there for many, many years. They're going to start focusing on who they are, whose they are, and they are going to start living in accordance with that. God's people had come home. My question for you tonight, why don't you come home? Why don't you come back home? Each person is separated from God by their own sin. And each person has the opportunity to be reconciled to God. There is a song that we sometimes sing. And the first verse of it goes, I've wandered far away from God. Now I'm coming home. The paths of sin too long I've trod. Lord, I'm coming home. Are you sitting here tonight ready to come home? God has given us the way. He has given us the exact path that leads to His front porch, if you want to put it like that. We know how to come home to our Father. All He asks is that you follow the correct path. The path that He has given us, He says, will lead directly to Him. Isn't that what we want? Shouldn't that be what we want in life? If you're sitting here tonight and you're ready to start that journey of being one of God's children, you have opportunity to do that right now. If you are a child of God and you have strayed, you have denied Jesus in your life, the way you've been living, and you're ready to come back home, you have this opportunity to make things right. If you would like the prayers of the saints here for forgiveness, if you have sin of a public nature, or just for strength in going forward and living a better life, let us pray with you and for you to that end. Whatever you need to do to make sure you are right with God before you leave here, please take care of it right now as together we stand and sing.